Hello again, it's Professor Guess, and this time we're talking about the essay Testing Hypotheses. Testing hypotheses deals with a certain type of logical argument. All of these arguments are conditional arguments because the first premise is a conditional premise. What is a conditional premise? A conditional premise is one that is a if-then statement. If this, then that. It's a cause-effect. You're testing the cause and effect of something. So if you want to say, if I open my hand, then the pen will drop. That is a conditional statement. If I open my hand is the first part of the premise, and it's called an antecedent. It says, if I open my hand, then the pen will drop. What follows then is the pen will drop, and that is called the consequent. All right. The antecedent is what follows if. The consequent is what follows then. If I open my hand, then the pen will drop. All right. So that's the first premise in all of these arguments. It's called a conditional. All right. Because there's conditions. Condition, if this, then that. All right, cause effect. This is how we're going over this type of particular argument. Now, if you've already read the essay, if you looked at it and thought, oh my God, this looks like math, and got scared, don't. It's just a nice way, when you see what they call placeholders. A placeholder is just a letter that stands in the place of a group of words or a sentence, all right, depending on what it is. So for this particular essay, since we're going to go over 4 different types of arguments, all right, we can create placeholders that stands for certain words. All right, we just did, if I open my hand, then the pen will drop. All right, so we're going to have P stand for I open my hand, and Q stand for the pen will drop. P and Q are placeholders that take the place of this. That way, when you write out the arguments, you don't have to write out these sentences over and over again. It really just saves you time more than anything. All right. Each of these arguments have the first premise as an if-then statement. The one we're going to use for this class is if I open my hand, then the pen will drop. And we're going to test to see if these arguments are valid. All right. There are 4 arguments. Each of the arguments have the same first premise. If I open my hand, then the pen will drop, which we're going to put as if P, then Q. If P, I open my hand, then Q, the pen will drop. All right? So we're testing to see, depending on the second premise, which of these structures are valid and which are invalid. All right, so when you have a logical argument, you have a structure underneath the actual words, underneath the sentence. So if the sentence is, if I open my hand, then the pen will drop, that's the sentence. The logical structure underneath that sentence is if this, then that. It's a conditional statement. If cause, then effect. If antecedent, then consequent. All right, if this happens, then that happens. All right, that's the logical structure. So we're going to look at the logical structure of conditional arguments and see which one are valid and which are invalid. So the first one we're going to look at is, let's see, if P, then Q. If I open my hand, then the pen will drop. The second premise is P. I opened my hand. Premise 1, if I open my hand, the pen will drop. Premise 2, I opened my hand. Conclusion, the pen dropped. To test for validity, what do? You assume the truth of your premises, and if based on that assumption the conclusion has to be true, it is called valid. This is a valid structure. If P, then Q. The second premise is P, the antecedent. If the antecedent happens, then the consequent has to happen. If I open my hand, the pin will drop. Premise 2, I opened my hand. Conclusion, the pin dropped. This is a valid structure. This is a valid argument. All right? Let's take a look at the next one. Same first premise. If I open my hand, then the pin will drop. Premise 2, the pin dropped. Conclusion, I opened my hand. You notice that in this argument, the second premise, instead of being the antecedent, it's the consequent. So, if I open my hand, the pin will drop. If P, then Q. Same one. Premise 2 is now the consequent. The pin dropped. Conclusion, I opened my hand. We want to test for validity. You assume the truth of your premises. And if based on that assumption, the conclusion has to be true, it's valid. If it's possible that the conclusion can be false, then it's invalid. So let's look at it. We'll test. If I open my hand, then the pin will drop. If P, then Q. Premise 2, the pin dropped. If I open my hand, the pin will drop. Premise 2, we assume it's true, the pin dropped. Conclusion, I opened my hand. Did I open my hand? No. If I didn't open my hand, the conclusion is false, which means you have true premises and a false conclusion. This argument is invalid. The structure of this argument is invalid. If P, then Q, second premise Q, conclusion P. Just because the consequent happened doesn't mean the antecedent had to happen. Or you can think of it as cause and effect. I tend to think of it as cause and effect. If the cause happens, the effect has to happen. If the antecedent happens, the consequent has to happen. If I open my hand, the pin will drop. If I open my hand, the pin has to drop. All right? But if the consequent happens, the pin dropped, it can drop for more than one reason. If I open my hand, the pin will drop. The pin dropped. Well, the pin dropped because I moved my hand. I didn't open my hand. So the consequent can happen for more than one reason. So if I open my hand, then the pin will drop. Premise 2, I open my hand. Opening my hand does not prove, let me start over. I think I said that wrong. If I open my hand, then the pin will drop. Premise 2, the pin dropped. Just because the pin dropped does not prove I opened my hand, because the pin can drop for more than one reason. So this logical structure is invalid. You see? Now, let's look at the next one. If I open my hand, the pin will drop. Premise 1, they all have the same first premise. Premise 2, the pin did not drop. Now we're putting not in front of the second premise. If I open my hand, the pin will drop. The pin did not drop. If I open my hand, the pin will drop. The pin did not drop. Well, if the pin doesn't drop, is it possible? The conclusion is I did not open my hand. If the pin drops, if I open my hand, then the pin drops. If I open my hand, then the pin drops. Premise 2, the pin did not drop. Well, if the pin did not drop, I couldn't have opened my hand, so not P, because if I had opened my hand, what would have happened? The pin would have dropped. So, is this valid? It is. A valid argument. If the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true. If I open my hand, then the pin will drop. Premise 2, the pin did not drop. Well, if the pin didn't drop, I couldn't have opened my hand, which is the conclusion. Not P, I did not open my hand, because if I had opened my hand, then the pin would have dropped, and that would make premise 2 false. So if both of those premises are true, you have to have a true conclusion, which makes this valid. All right, one more. If I open my hand, the pin will drop. Premise 2, I did not open my hand. Conclusion, the pen did not drop. If I open my hand, the pen will drop. Premise 2, I did not open my hand. Does that prove the pen did not drop? Premise 1, if I open my hand, the pen will drop. True. Premise 2, I did not open my hand. So that's true. Conclusion, the pen did not drop. Wait a second. Is it possible to have true premises and a false conclusion on this one? If I open my hand, then the pen will drop. Premise 2, I did not open my hand. Didn't open my hand. Conclusion, the pen did not drop. The pen did drop. I did not open my hand. This is invalid. Alright. If I open my hand, the pen will drop. I did not open my hand. Well, just because I didn't open my hand doesn't prove that the pen's not going to drop, because it could drop for other reasons. I moved my hand instead of opening my hand. So this is an invalid structure. This is the structure of the argument. It's just we put placeholders in place of the words so we don't have to write it every time. All right? And this represents, sorry, the logical structure of the argument. All right? Now, we just went over 4 different logical structures for arguments. They all have the same first premise, which is called a conditional premise. All right? It just means it's cause and effect. You can also call it antecedent consequent. It's not, whichever words you want to use, it means the same thing. All right. Now, the question I have is, if you change what the placeholders mean, will the argument stay valid or invalid? So if we make P mean Marie walks to work, and Q mean Marie is late to work, we can now put those placeholders into these arguments and see, does the argument remain valid or invalid even if the placeholders change? Another way of saying that, does the logical structure of this argument remain valid or invalid regardless of what the placeholders are? So, placeholder, P, Maria walks to work. Q, Maria is late to work. So, let's look at the first argument. If P, then Q. If Maria walks to work, then she is late to work. Premise 2, Maria walks to work. Conclusion, Maria is late to work. So, if Maria walks to work, then she's late. Maria walked. Well, if Maria walked, we know she's late to work because if P, then Q. Conclusion, Q has to be valid. If Maria walks to work, then she's late. Maria walked to work. Conclusion, Maria is late to work. Has to be true. Those premises support that conclusion, so it has to be true, which makes this valid. The structure is a valid structure. Whatever you put in the placeholders, it will remain a valid structure. You could say if the moon is blue, then the sun is green. Premise 2, the moon is blue. Conclusion, I think I said the sun is green. All right. If the moon is blue, then the sun is green. Premise 2, the moon is blue. Well, we know if the moon is blue, then the sun is green. Conclusion, the sun is green. This is a valid structure. You can change what the placeholders mean, but the structure is valid. When you're looking at arguments, if you can recognize the structure, it can clue you in on whether you have a valid argument or not. All right, let's do the other ones real quick. If P, then Q. So, if Maria walks to work, then Maria is late to work. Premise 2, Maria is late to work. Conclusion, Maria walked to work. So, if Maria walks to work, then she's late. Premise 2, she's late to work. Conclusion, she walked to work. Now, If Maria walks to work, she's late. And she's late. Does being late prove she walked? No. If you're running late, have you ever run late? I have. And jumped in a cab thinking you would save yourself time and the cab would be quicker than the bus? It is not always quicker than the bus. She could have known that she was going to be late if she walked, so she grabbed a cab or a bus and still been late. So, if P, then Q. If Maria walks to work, then she's late. Premise 2, Maria is late. Being late does not prove that she walked to work, so this is an invalid structure. Because you can have true premises and a false conclusion. Alright. Let's do the last two. If Maria walks to work, then she's late. Maria was not late. Conclusion, Maria did not walk to work. So, test for validity. Assume the truth of your premises. If based on that assumption, the conclusion has to be true, it's valid. If it's possible to have true premises and a false conclusion, it's invalid. If Maria walks to work, then she's late. Maria was not late. Conclusion, Maria did not walk to work. So, what do you think? Valid or invalid? Dun, 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 dun. Valid. If Maria walks to work, then she's late. Maria was not late. Well, if Maria wasn't late, then she couldn't have walked to work, because if she had walked to work, she would have been late. The logical structures of argument remain valid or invalid, regardless of what you put in as the placeholders. Okay? Let's do the last one. If Maria walks to work, then Maria is late. Maria did not walk to work. Does that prove that Maria was not late to work? If Maria is late to work, if Maria walks to work, sorry, I messed that up. Listen again. If Maria walks to work, then Maria is late. Premise 2, Maria did not walk. Conclusion, Maria was not late. So, is this a valid argument? Assume the truth of your premises. If Maria walks to work, then she's late. Premise 2, she didn't walk to work. Well, if she didn't walk to work, she could have taken a bus. Could she have still been late? Yes. So, do these two premises prove that she was not late? No. Because it's possible to have true premises. If Maria walks to work, then she's late. Maria did not walk to work. And still have a false conclusion. The conclusion said she wasn't late. She could have been late. All she had to do was take the bus. So this logical structure is invalid. These structures you will see on the homework. You will see them with different placeholders. If you recognize the logical structure of the argument, you'll know whether it's valid or invalid. Look for the structure underneath it. We just went over 4 structures. So if you recognize the structure, you'll know right off the bat on the homework, this is valid, this is invalid. If you don't recognize the structure, do it the slow way. Do what you do to test for validity. Assume the truth of your premises. If based on that assumption, you have to accept the conclusion is true, it's valid. If it's possible to have true premises and a false conclusion, it's invalid. So that is the main ideas behind testing hypothesis. Your second logical essay. If you have any questions, just send me an email or I'll talk to you in the chat room during my online office hours. Have a good one. I'll talk to you later.